All right, so this last video for now is going to be showing you how to analyze some JSON logs, particularly a imaginary server. Um, so I have this JSON file called server logs, and it contains some objects that have timestamp, status, and endpoint attributes. And we are going to write a script to analyze these. So, um, this is a common task in IT operations and threat detection. So we're focusing on identifying patterns and anomalies and building a foundation for an automated alert system. So, uh, we're starting off our script with importing the JSON module. Um, that is essential for working with JSON data. And we're also doing an import from the collections module called counter. And it's a subclass of dictionaries that count items. So that is perfect for us to log summaries or for log summaries, like the status codes um, of these server connections. So the first thing we need to do is load our example server log. So to do that, I need to open the file, which is called serverlogs.json, and I need to open it in read mode. And I'm going to say as file. You see me sometimes using just F, sometimes file. It it's just a variable name representing a file object. So then I'm going to say logs is the variable that I'm going to load the file into. So we are taking JSON and loading it into Python. So this is deserialization, right? Um, so we're opening our file and loading the JSON and parsing it into a Python list of dictionaries. Um, and many web servers like Apache or Flask applications log events in structured formats, a lot like JSON, for easier parsing and automation. So that's something you can kind of compare this to in like a real world context. Um, the next thing that we need to do now that we've loaded our server log is to wow, count the HTTP status codes. So I'm going to use the counter for this. So I'm going to have a variable called status counts, and I'm going to call counter on my log data, particularly the status attribute for each log. Oh my gosh, each log in logs. So status counts is going to contain the counts for each of the um, status numbers in our data. And we're going to print that the status code summary is as follows, status counts. So right here, I'm going to stop and run what we have so far. Excuse me. Oh, I need to change directory. I'm still in JSON versus pickle. So I need to change directory into JSON log analysis. All right, I have added this. That is the directory that I am in, where my analyze log script is and the server logs .json file is. So now we won't have any file not found errors. And I ran it a couple times to validate that it works, but I'm going to run it again so you can see it with your eyeballs that it does in fact work. Um, so it counted 4 instances of 200 as a status code, 3 instances of 500, 2 instances of 404, and 1 instance of 401. We can do a quick check on that. Beans. All right, there's 4 200s. 1, 2, 3, 4. True, so true. Um, there's 2 404s might be. 1 401 and 2 500s. 3 500s. Where's the third? 1, 2, 3. All right, so yes, the counter does work. Um, it's handy dandy built in, so I would hope that Python is putting out working functions that we can use. So that is the very basic counter. And let me just go over this really quick for those of you who don't know what the heck I'm talking about with HTTP status codes. So you know how when you go to a web page and you get like a 404 error 404 message, web page not found. The code 404 is the HTTP status code for a page not being found. So it's commonly used if there's a missing resource. If you've ever seen a 500 error code, that means there was an internal server error. So the server crashed, or there was a bug, or maybe there's an overload of traffic. 401 is unauthorized, so there's an authentication failure, and anything within the 200s is okay. So it was a successful request. So you likely won't see when you go to a web page and it works and loads perfectly fine, you won't see HTTP status code 200 on the top of the screen, like because it works and any old user of the internet isn't going to really give a butt about the error code or status code. But if you look in the developer tools and look at the underlying JavaScript of the web page, you could find that the HTTP status code is 200. So that's something if you want to be a little detective and snoop around the developer tools of a web page. But that's not what we're going to be doing for the rest of this lecture. So the next part is we want to do some simple anomaly detection. And to do that, we have to set a threshold. So I'm going to say simple anomaly. Oh my gosh, why can I not type? Simple anomaly detection. And we're setting our threshold to 2. So we're going to say if there are 2 instances of a code, then that is a high number of issues or high number of that particular status code. And we want to report a message or send an alert depending on the code. So particularly, we'd be probably pretty worried about the 500s because that would mean our server's down. So I'm going to say if the status counts for particularly 500 is greater than our threshold, then I want to print a message alerting that there is a high number of server errors, particularly with a 500 status. If someone is using this, if your system has this script running on it and any old user gets this message, um, it's nice to add that it's a because of a 500 status. Um, so this is checking if the number of 500 errors exceeds a predefined threshold. In this case, we've said 2. And if so, it prints an alert, mimicking the behavior of a basic security or operations monitoring system. So this is useful because an attacker might try a DDoS attack, exploit vulnerabilities of the site, or trigger server crashes. And a spike in 500s could mean that it is broken. And that could be broken on purpose or an accident, but it's good to know how many 500 errors you're getting because if your website is down, then you can't reach customers, you can't sell more products, you can't talk to clients, you can't provide a service. So, something that's very important to keep track of. And this is a very simple automated script that checks your server logs and will report if there is an issue. Um, let's see. So you can extend this by adding timestamps to the logs, and you can also group errors by time interval. So to do that, I want to import the date time function from the date time module. So from date, yes. Um, And I want to say errors are going to be determined by searching every log um, for log in logs. Um, if, oops, if the log's status is 500, then that is considered an error. So all of the instances of 500 will be stored in our errors variable, and I want to get the timestamps of those errors. So I'm going to call that date time and say from ISO format. Um, ISO format is constructing a date from a string in this particular format, which is what we're getting from the server log. So that's why that is what the function that we're calling. And to get that, I need to get the value at the timestamp key within the log. Am I missing log? Um, feel like I'm missing something. Log for log in our errors variable. So getting all the errors that are 500 that have the code 500 and getting all the timestamps of those instances. And then it's nice to have a visual of this, right? Like we have the errors, we have the timestamps. We could just simply print these, but Last week, I introduced you guys to matplotlib in our in-class activity. So I'm going to import matplotlib, um, particularly .pyplot as PLT because this is one of the instances where I really want to use an alias because that is too many dang letters to type. So I'm going to say that I'm going to use it as PLT. And I am going to create a bar graph with the status counts, keys, and the values. So that is going to be our X and Y. I want to give it a title. I'm going to say HTTP status code frequency. And then next, I want to label the axes. So I want to label my X is going to be our status code. And our Y is the count of each of the status codes. And then plot.show is what actually displays the final plot. So I'm going to save that. And if I run this, it gives us a nice little figure here. So there's 4 instances of a 200 code, 3 of the 500, and then there was 1 of the 401 or 402, and then 2 of the 404. So that's a nice little visual we got there. And it really only took 5 lines of code. Matplotlib is sick. It's awesome. Um, it's I do not have the time to teach it to you, but I highly recommend using it for your classes. If you're doing research, it's amazing for data analysis and then plotting the results. It's amazing. Highly recommend exploring this. Um, but yeah, that is all I really wanted to talk about with analyzing the JSON files. We got all of this data from this server logs.json, and we did a quick basic analysis where we just printed the counts of each status, and then we checked for a certain threshold, particularly with the 500 status codes. And then lastly, we plotted our um, plotted our accounts. And that is all I'm going to talk about with this. On Wednesday, we'll do a in-class activity about pickles and JSON. So stay tuned for that. All right, see y'all on Wednesday.